Hello, anybody else out there tonight? Go ahead into chat if you would, please. Let me know you're there. So I wanted to start off this evening. Well, I still want to. I want to start this evening off with something that was pointed out to me. We have a group of about 400 who are involved in prepping through our church, and so we had a Zoom meeting Tuesday for a couple hours, and they kicked it off with 1 Timothy 5:8, and so I'd like to share that with you. And remember, this is one of the pastoral epistles, and this was written by St. Paul later in his life to Timothy. And 1 Timothy 5:8. So this is kind of correcting false doctrines and helping people to understand more about how to live a good life. And so in 1 Timothy 5:8, he says, "And whosoever does not provide for relatives, and especially family members, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." So that is from the New American Version. Let me see what we can do here with this Revised Standard Version. I didn't even bother to look it up. Let's take a look here. Probably most of you are going to be using King James. I'll look that up that way too if you would like me to. Hi, LG. Welcome. So 1 Timothy 5:8. It says, now this is the Revised Standard Version. And it says, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his own family, he has disowned the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So it's a very close translation. But anyhow, one of the things I think that Jim Wyatt kind of stresses in this series of books, and I think that Jim Wyatt is personality-wise an extension of Steve Smith. I think that there's an awful lot of similarity between the two, even to the point where both of their spouses are named Kelly. So anyhow, that's I think that that's an altruistic thing there, but it's great to have some insight into what he does and how he thinks. So let me get into the banners here, and so let's start off with the first thing that I think that really caught my attention was, come on, scroll for me here, please. There we go. The first thing that caught my attention was foraging. So it starts off with Jim and his son Aiden, and they are out high prepping by faith, and they're out foraging. And he's kind of grilling him on which plants are edible or not. And so I think that it's just kind of mentioned and it's part of the development of the scene, trying to show father and son relationships and everything else. But I think one of the things that we need to have, and that's why I say keep a notebook with you as you read these things, because the important thing here is that Jim is teaching Aiden all of the plants that are edible in the area so that he can go forage for food. So, I think the question becomes one of, do you know all the plants in your area that are edible and which ones are poisonous? And, the contrary to that. And I know last time I went to HEB after reading this book, they have HEB as a local grocery store, and probably the biggest one here in Texas. But anyhow, when you go up to the cashier's line, let me see. Yeah, but I think it says it's rescheduled for today, right? Let me check here real quick. How do I do that? I don't know how to do that. Oh, well, I guess I messed up. But anyhow, they have these little pamphlets, and and one of them was foraging edible plants here in Central Texas. So I kind of got that Let me see if I can't. What can I do here to edit? Edit. Title. Oh, well. I'm changing the description. Okay. Thank you, Prepping by Faith. Gosh, I tell you what, I don't know what I'd do without you. Okay. Um, so that's so that's the first question I would ask. As we read the book is, do you know what your uh, foraging and poisonous plants are in the area? Likewise, learn how to butcher, how to field dress and butcher animals in your local area. What's most common. This poor squirrel today, as we were driving home, thank God he stopped in time, because he a very young squirrel, and it looked up at us and stopped just in time to avoid being run over by several cars. But would you know how to cook a squirrel? And same thing with fishing. Do you know the fish and everything that's concerned with processing of fish? There was a quote, and I think this is an experience of Jim's, and but he has a real good quote, and I love it. Hi, LJ. Hi, Prepping by Faith. Both great. And so that quote is, now that there's no YouTube, you don't have to worry about a bunch of keyboard warriors telling you that you don't know what you're talking about when you're doing things that they never have. There are so many experts out there. There are so many people that want to do video reviews of what you say and demean you and everything else. They know more than you did. For example, something I did in the Army for 20 years. Really funny one is, after being in several third world countries and several modern European countries, I had a goat herder on Facebook. Oh, this was probably 2 years ago. Tell me how things are overseas. And she's never been outside of her county in North Carolina, but she's an expert on what it's going to be like barter-wise in third world countries in a post-apocalyptic future. So, those people exist. And as a matter of fact, there was one that was recently on Angry Prepper, and was bragging about the fact that he is made up with one of our people here on now, and that things were finally resolved. And I said, "Oh yeah, that's interesting." And the minute I typed in my comment, and I'd been rather quiet up until then, the entire facial experience changed. So it was kind of something. I still haven't heard anything from him, but that's how things go. Now I have a corollary to this, and this actually came from a channel that I don't follow that closely anymore. But this is Brad from Full Spectrum Survival, and so this is kind of his interpretation or corollary to what Steve Smith said as far as Jim Wyatt. And he said that a troll exclaims beyond sound reason their delusion that is only their opinion based on perceived but slighted facts. So basically, they heard one or two things, don't know much about it, but they're an expert in it anyway. So that's kind of Brad's interpretation of what Jim Wyatt said. So I think that's kind of cool. I'm sure everybody here has been exposed to that at some point in their life. One thing that I learned, and it never really, I never really thought about it, but especially with a lot of the carjackings and things that are going on. And then after reading Furfall's book, and the people who would come up and attack cars and everything else, Steve talks about it, and Jim was talking about it. And he says, when you normally stand and you're reading somebody and you have your arms folded, he says, just think of it. If you have that thing over here and all you have to do is lower your hand and pull it out, that's a lot better than having to lower your hands, pull your shirt up and pull it out and shoot. Okay, so he's talking about the cross draw, and I thought, wow, I never thought of that. And especially when you're in an automobile, if you're the driver in an automobile, just think, you've got your strap coming across your shoulder down to the buckle, you've got your strap coming across your waist down to the buckle. Both of those straps meet right where I have that thing, and that's going to be heck to get that out. So it makes more sense to have it on the other side in a cross draw position where I will have more rapid access to it if I needed to in an emergency. Yes, Prepping by Faith says her favorite thing to say to a lot of them is, your perception is not always the reality. Yeah, we try to that, but they're out there, and they're self-degreed professionals in everything. So, but I think those are sometimes you just don't have to say anything, and you let them kind of build their own reputation, and people will see them for what they are. As a matter of fact, that happens in this book. And let me get down here just a minute. Well, anyhow, we'll get there in a minute. When we talk about Elaine, what's her name? Dahlgren. Well, that's a prime example of what we're talking about. We'll get there in just a couple of minutes. That's later on in the book. So one of the things that Bill and Jim are talking about, they're talking to a woman, Anna, and she's going to be teaching along with Tracy the medicinal herbs class in that area. So not only find out what plants are available to you as far as what's edible and what's poisonous, also study medicinal herbs and essential oils. So we need to get into a form of homeopathic medicine in the future, because we won't have access to China and or India and all the medications that they make for us. Remember that most of them are no longer made in the U.S. So we're going to have to kind of be on our own, and so make sure you have those things available to you as well. And I wanted to go back to this one just a second. I really want to have an interview with somebody who knows quite a bit about medicinal herbs and essential oils, and do an interview of them. And so one of the things I've been remiss on is interviewing some outstanding people, and I would like to start doing that. I just might start with the two of you, LG and Prepping by Faith. I think that would be great. But so we'll get together on that, and but I think that there's a lot that a lot of people have to offer, and I think there's a lot of things we still need to learn. I don't know that much about medicinal herbs or essential oils, and that's going to become an essential part of our future. Then when they're talking about there's this effort by a whole bunch of people in Topeka, which is the capital of Kansas, and these are all the politicians, and they're trying to rebuild Kansas. And Kansas is as a matter of fact, I was doing some research on this just for another thing that I want to do here in the near future. 80% of the U.S. lives in 3% of the area. So 80% is urbanized and lives in 3% of the land. And then the other 20% are distributed amongst the other 97% of the available land in the U.S. So, that's kind of the difference between the rural freedom, if you want to call it that, or expanse, versus the metropolitan conglomeration or density of people. And, that's just kind of crazy. But anyhow, one of the things is they're talking about rebuilding Kansas is about planning for the future. In order to look at the future, what you have to do first is take a look at the past and do a critical analysis. What worked, what didn't work. One of my pet peeves is the 17th Amendment, where basically states' rights was given up. And the way we gave up our states' rights. And so the way that the original Constitution had it set up was we had the three branches. We had the executive, judicial, and the legislative, and each one of them was separate. And then within the legislative, hi, apartment prepper, welcome. And within the legislative, you had an upper and a lower chamber. So the upper chamber was the Senate, and that represented equality among the 50 states. Well, not at that time, but the 13 states at that time. And every state had two representatives appointed by the state legislature to represent the desires of the state. And then each of the states had the House of Representatives, the representatives, which is based off of population. And they were elected by the people. So the Senate was appointed by the state legislature. The House of Representatives was elected by the population. Then along came the 17th Amendment. And what they did was they changed that so that now the senators are nothing more than an overglorified House of Representatives. They no longer represent the interests of the states. And that kind of did away with our idea of federalism, and in a sense kind of negated the 10th Amendment, which was the things that are reserved for the states. So that's kind of interesting. And so what we want to do is in the future, we just want to take a look at what has worked and what hasn't worked in the past if we're going to rebuild it. I think we have to be, fairly critical about that too, about what does and what doesn't work. Another good example is, there's a perception out there of what the separation of church and state is. But if you take a look at the Federalist Papers, if you take a look at the letter that was sent by Thomas Jefferson to the First Baptist Church of Danbury, Connecticut, and he actually wrote the letter on January 1st, 1803, a New Year's present, I guess. Connecticut was primarily Catholic. And so the First Baptist Church felt that they were being persecuted and not being given freedom of religion. And they wrote to Thomas Jefferson and asked the federal government to intervene. And Jefferson said there's an inseparable wall between the government and the church. We cannot intervene. Well, that's being quoted quite a bit, separation of church and state, saying that you cannot have state or morality involved in religion, which is false. Religion has been the centralized point of morality for the government up until 1962 or 1963. And LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was he probably even earlier than that? I think he was 54. But LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, a local here, was running for, I believe it was the Senate. It may have been another position. And he asked for the endorsement of some of the churches because he realized how much influence the churches had in telling their congregations who to vote for. And as a result of that, none of the churches in his area wanted to endorse him. They thought he was a crook. And so he went back to the House of Representatives and passed a bill that says that if churches get involved in politics and recommend one candidate over another, they would lose their tax-free status. So that's how the government now controls the churches, as far as them not having the freedom to tell their congregations about who to vote for or what the advantages and disadvantages of each one are. We need to do away with that law. But anyhow, that's kind of interesting. So then, Jim has tasked Bill Gardner. And if you remember back in the very first book, he's the judge. His daughter graduated from law school at Kansas University, the Jayhawks, and his wife is with them, and she's an engineer. She later builds all the conduits, electricity, and everything else for the. Really, I did not know that had happened yet, Apartment Pepper. Thank you. I'll have to check into that. But anyhow, Bill Gardner and his family was being, his wife and daughter were basically in the process of being sexually assaulted by these three gang members when they were met by Christian and Mike as they were returning back to Stonemont. And so that's how that got involved in book one. So now they found out that Bill Gardner was an ex-judge. And so they've asked him to kind of come up with a codification of the rule of law within Stonemont. And so he just said he came across with a quote from Matthew 7:12, and it says, basically, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so that became the basis of all the law for Stonemont. And I think that's fairly good. If you look back, go all the way back to Moses. I mean, he did it on 2 tablets with 10 laws, and of course later on we expanded that in Exodus and Deuteronomy, and we have close to 365 death penalties that are enumerated in those books. But anyhow, Matthew 7:12, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and that can become the basis of law for any organization or any state or anything else. Now we come to Elaine, Professor. It's Algren. I had a guy in the Army with me back in the late 70s in Germany. His name was Danny Dahlgren, D-A-L. But anyhow, we have this conversation about overly self-impressed pseudo-intellectuals like Professor Elaine Algren. Remember, she's the one that goes into the meeting and requests 100 credits a month salary. She's going to teach ancient art, and her husband is going to teach African tribal ritual drumming. And so for each of those, they want 100 credits a month for them to teach those classes. And so the question, the implication is, Jim, what value is that to our community? I mean, yeah, it's a nice to know thing if you really want to know it, but does that serve a function within our community? Why should we pay you for something that's not going to enhance, grow, or benefit in a tangible way our community? Well, it all kinds of starts off with this little tete-a-tete between Elaine Algren and I think she calls Kelly Carrie. And Kelly introduces her and she says, "Well, thank you, Carrie." And she says, "No, it's Kelly." She says, "What?" She says, "My name is Kelly. You said Carrie." She says, "Whatever." So of course Jim picks up on that, and so later on her name is Elaine, and so Jim says, and she wants to be called Ms. She's one of those kinds. So she keeps her name. She doesn't want to have her husband. She doesn't want to be subjected to her husband and all this kinds of stuff. All that stuff that we've heard mantras about for a while, and an uppity self-individual. And so Jim kind of puts her in her place by calling her Eileen. And she says, "It's Elaine." He says, "What?" She says, "Elaine, you said Eileen." So it kind of gets back at the Carrie Kelly thing. I think that's kind of neat. But we have some equivalents to Professor Algren here in Texas, and we call it all hat and no cattle. So you'll see a guy walking around with a big hat and everything else, and for some reason, and Steve was talking about this in one of his posts today about the hat can make a man and everything else. But anyhow, so it's just fake people. They want you to think that they're a big cattle driver, a big cattleman or whatever, and have more than they have. And they do that with the size of their hat, but they don't have any cattle. In my MBA program and in the Army, we would give financial advice, and that is say, you'd tell them, "See that guy over there? You need to buy him for what he's worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth." And that's going to give you a big net profit. So that's kind of the corollaries to this Professor Elaine Algren and what's going on. Yeah, LG, I will tell you, and this one strikes me personally. I know of somebody who's the family is basically on disability welfare, and she wanted to go to college. And so she went to one of the most expensive colleges around here, a private college, and she was getting a degree in German. And so at the end of her junior year, and remember, in almost every degree plan, you have to spend your last 2 years focused on your degree plan or your degree. And so her junior year, she switched over and she went because somebody convinced her that she would have a totally worthless degree if she got a degree in German. But you could teach that at a local public school. You could of course work as a translator. There's all kinds of things you can do with a language degree. So her junior year, at the end of her junior year, she changed over and got it, and then spent 2 more years at a very expensive college on welfare income, and getting a degree in women's studies. And so now she's a retail sales clerk at the outlet mall, and that shows you what that degree is worth. Of course, all that's on student loans, which are now being forgiven, and we get to pay for that. So that wise decision. Okay, let's get down here. Why am I not being able to? There we go. Okay, the next thing that happens in the book, and I'm going to kind of encapsulate something that happens right at this point and something that happens almost at the end of the book. And we meet Maurice Force Johnson. So Maurice had a bad experience and ended up in prison and, got out. And you get this, you become almost prejudicial. You say, yeah, that's that typical thing that goes on where, you're impoverished, you have one parent, you're neglected, you grew up in a bad hood and all this kinds of stuff, and bad things happen to you. And hi, Shelley. And then all of a sudden, they go to prison, they have to pay for their crimes and everything else. So, you kind of have this set up. At least I'll admit, I was kind of prejudiced in my thinking about Force, Maurice. And I say, well, they're setting up another bad guy. This is kind of like the bad guys in books 1 and 2. And I was very happily surprised that I was wrong. And this guy turns out to be a fantastic savior of a woman who's about to be sexually assaulted in front of her children and everything else. And he just takes a crowbar to the 3 guys who are sexually assaulting her and takes care of her. So takes care of her and the children when he finds out that she doesn't have anybody to help her. So then he kind of assumes that role of a father figure, a provider, a protector, and everything else. And, I think that's substantial. And I think that gives us hope for our human race. Okay, so I was incorrect about the law being repealed, but there is something about the wording that religious organizations can talk about politics. No, okay. Yeah, I know that the original law was passed by LBJ because he was upset that the local churches wouldn't endorse him in his run for I think it was Congress. Yes, isn't that true? Prepping by faith. This, because I was just very happy. I look at this as being, kind of endemic, that we shouldn't judge people too much at our first glance at them, that people can change, people can become heroes, even from squalor and the worst of living conditions and everything else. There's an opportunity for everybody to step up and be of good character. And I think that I was very, very pleasantly surprised at what happened. And how Maurice turned out. And then, of course, when Mike and Christian and the Cool brothers go out and meet, I think his name is Eldon, and this is the Ancient Order of Hibernia. Remember, right there in the Ritzy area, with all the cars and all that kinds of stuff. And he even mentions the fact that he has a very good community relations with Force and his community, which borders his. So, I think that's fantastic. That not only has he become a positive influence for a very small family, but then he assumes a larger role and he takes on as protector of the community as well. So that's just really fantastic. Let me see. We got 5 comments here. Hi, SSR. Yeah, I'm hoping that is going to be the case in the future. Prepping by faith is that as we see what we've done in the past, we have the opportunity to fix it, and we have the opportunity to build on it. We have the opportunity to be a lot better than what we are. So correct the mistakes of the past, and I include that with me. I've made an awful lot of mistakes in my life. I wish I could take them back. Now, I will say this one caused me to have a conversation with Steve. And that Eldon has extremely great taste. And he had a bottle of Eagle Rare. Eagle Rare is one of those that there's only 2,000 bottles of it made a year. And I happened to get one for my son-in-law because he's a bourbon aficionado. And so I got him a bottle of Eagle Rare. And this company that makes this is Buffalo Trace is the name of the company. And so Buffalo Trace is the only whiskey that is rated higher than Eagle Rare by a lot of tasters. But this bottle, the Eagle Rare, I found it at Camp Mabry and bought one for my son-in-law for Christmas. And then they had a New Year's party at their house, and some of his friends came over and drank all of his Eagle Rare mixed with Coke. And he was so upset. So I went out and found him. I couldn't find any more Eagle Rare because that the whole year's worth of Eagle Rare had been sold. But I did find him the one that was better, supposedly, which is Buffalo Trace. So, when you take a look at it, Eldon had great whiskey trace because that's the number 2 ranked whiskey in the U.S. And Jim Wyatt, of course, liked Wild Turkey, which is the number 3 ranked whiskey in the U.S. So evidently they've got some very good whiskey tastes. This is one I think is going to be very important. They're talking about, and we have to go back to book 2. Book 2 is where we had the people who were being kept in the elementary school in cages, and they were used as sex toys and dancers and everything else, and being sold. And so the group was basically selling these women for entertainment to the men of the area. And so then Jim and the crew, this is the one where Jim gets shot in, as a matter of fact. And Jim and the crew go in, they save all these women from it, and the men, and then they belittle all the men. They take them to their families and say, do you know where your husband's been? Do you know what he's been spending your money on, and everything else, instead of taking care of you? So it's, it's kind of throwing away or casting off all that evil behind the sex trade industry. And but one of the guys who went there for the sole purpose every time of trying to see if his daughter was still alive and see what he could do to try to help her. And so those kind of guys, became the ones that they tried to take care of. Well, one of their daughters was so traumatically disturbed by the situation that happened there that, even after they've been saved and put into a safe environment and they're being given support by their family, there are going to be people that we're exposed to in this post SHTF world without rule of law type of a scenario. And how are we going to deal with a lot of emotional trauma that's going to be out there? I mean, what kind of provisions are we going to have, and how can we help those people, or can we help those people? And do we need to put in place some sort of plans now, realizing that there's an opportunity for that to exist in our future? And, as much as we want to try to avoid it, there are chances that it's going to happen. So LG says, I was just talking about how the prepper community is the only place where I found people essentially encouraging others to keep living and prepare to keep living while the rest of the world wants death. And I would say that there's even a religious extremist group who is, awaiting being brought up into a cloud and aren't doing any preparation either. They want to die for something, and that's, I find that a little bit disturbing as well. Yeah, we aren't very effective in dealing with emotional trauma right now. You are absolutely correct. And the trained people that we have are insufficient. I don't think there's enough emphasis put on it. I think we rely too much on drugs and narcotics and psychogenic medications. And, I get involved with a lot of military who have PTSD, and it's tough. It's tough. And even those of us who have done the good fight, and had a reason for pulling the trigger, there still is something. We were not designed to shoot other people. And that does something to your mind, and you have to find a way to deal with that. So even the survivors on the other side have emotional trauma that need to be dealt with. And I mean, that emotional trauma is significant to the point where we're losing about 22 suicides a day from people who have been in combat. So that's crazy. Okay. As the Cools, the two, I think it's Alex and what's the other Cool brother's name, but they're the two heads of the two scout teams. They're going out to check the ancient order of Hibernia. And that's the ritzy area around the golf course and everything else inside the city. And the implication is this is inside the city. And I'm not sure whether it's Kansas City or it's Topeka, but they went to investigate the fires, and they come across and so they've got this box truck, and then they say, well, why don't we get some bikes? That would help us instead of going by foot. And so they one guy knows where there's a mountain bike. That's right. It's an Overland Park and Kansas City area. So he knows where there's a bike store. So they go into the bike store and they pick up 30 mountain bikes and repair parts and everything else and stuff those in the back of the box truck. And then they're using those, of course, to transport themselves at a faster pace. So it quadruples their speed almost, and that gets them into the area of Overland Park where there's the Ancient Order of Hibernia. And then it kind of shifts back to Stonemont. And so Tim and Zach have a discussion, and Zach's a very young man who's going to be on guard duty at one of the guard posts for Stonemont for one of the first times. And let me see what this is here real quick. Okay. Yeah. I think that's one of the wisest things to do. I'm looking at the river is 3/4 of a mile from me. So if we lose our water supply, then the only way I'm going to have to get water is I'm going to have to go down to the river and pick it up and bring it back up. Now we're about 120 to 150 feet above the river. So, I'm not even sure I can carry 1 5-gallon can. And Texas Redleg got me a bladder that fits inside a wheelbarrow, but I can't imagine pushing a wheelbarrow up a hill. That's 35 gallons. That's close to 200 pounds of water. I'm not so sure that's going to be for me. So what I'm looking at, of course, you have to realize I'm 70. So I'm looking at a tricycle, adult tricycle, and then with a trailer behind it. So can I use that to haul things up? So it's different from a mountain bike, but it's kind of the same philosophy, using something that's going to use gears and other things to make life a little bit easier. Really? Wow. When I was at the homeless shelter, when I was the HR director for our homeless shelter here in Austin, it's one of the 4 largest in the U.S. The things that the homeless do, the creativity and ingenuity on how they adapt and fix things is ingenious. Of course, I spent a lot of time talking to them about preparedness and how I could adapt that to us and our community. And just the things that they have to do to adapt is unbelievable. And they are geniuses. They come up with some brilliant ideas. Let me tell you, you're going to be extremely impressed, SSR. I think you'll be very, very happy. And so we're going to do volume 4 is going to be for the end of this month, the last Thursday of this month. Hi, Steve. How you doing? So we're talking right now. We just got to the part where the Cool brothers are going into, and I think it's Overland Park, if I remember correctly. They're going into the Kansas City area and suburbs and meeting the Ancient Order of Hibernia. So that's kind of where we are. So for all of you who don't know, Integrative Preparedness is Steve Smith. He is the author of the book. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them all in caps, and that way you can kind of capture his attention. And the other thing I was talking about, Steve, was we were talking. I told him about your latest video that came out today, where we were talking about your hats versus caps and how you can tell what people want by. And I told him that Texas and the MBA equivalents to what my impression of Elaine Algren. And I said, in Texas we call those all hat and no cattle. People trying to impress you with what you think they are. And I also told them that about the MBA equivalent to that is you want to buy somebody for what they're worth and sell them for what they think they're worth. And then we also got into your quote about no YouTube. So, and we had a nice discussion about that because what Brad in Full Spectrum Survival came out with a definition of a troll that I think you'd really enjoy. Okay, so let me see where we are here. Yeah, so the tricycle, that would be much easier on my legs, especially. And of all stupid things, we took our dogs to a day camp today, where they can go swimming and play with other dogs and everything else. And I stepped in a pile of poop. So I went outside to clean my shoe and bent over, and I'm still not used to this new hip, and I fell on the other hip. Oh, my God. My wife was so upset. She said, don't you ever do that again. Never squat down like that again. So, Thank God I didn't injure anything. Okay, so yeah, so if we can try to get either a mountain bike or a tricycle or something like that, because it really enhanced the Cool Brothers and their two teams, their ability to scout out this area of the smoke. And then they see these old cars. Now these have to be without computers or anything else because they are running very quickly. And so that means that they don't have the electronic ignition and the electronic fuel injection, everything else we have in the newer cars. They have to be the old carburetor types. And so that kind of draws the interest of the Cools and their two teams, and they're going to go check them out. And so that's where those bikes come in handy. Now, one of the things I think, and you can lose this if you read it too quickly, but I think this is a very key point that we have to, as leaders, as we form our communities, as we get the people around us to come with us, you have to make the most trivial thing that people don't feel important. You have to find a way to make them feel like they are the most important person in the world doing that task. And Steve does a very good job here with this conversation between Tim and Zach. And Tim basically says to Zach, he's going to put him on guard duty. This is a teenager now standing guard, and they're entrusting him that he's got to stay awake at night when everything's still quiet. And let me tell you, nighttime guard duty, it is very easy to close your eyes and drift off. And so you've got to motivate somebody how important this is. And I think Tim does a very good job. He says, I'm entrusting you with the safety of my family, of Jim's family. And he starts mentioning all these people. And you've got to make that job. You've got to show people how important what they're doing is for themselves and for others. And it's not a trivial or menial task that they're doing. It's something of great significance. You've got to make them feel like it's something especially for them, that they're doing something to accomplish something, and other people are going to be appreciative of it. And so, I want to make sure that you don't let that slip by, that we've got to find ways to edify people in what they're doing for us, with us, and of course, in a positive way to us on a regular basis. And so Prepping by Faith says, yeah, no job can be too trivial. Even disposing of waste correctly would be vital. Absolutely. Do you know the diseases that you can get hung up on if you don't dispose of waste properly? I wrote it down because I just did that video yesterday. And, there are 6 major diseases that you can die from if you don't take care of sanitation correctly. And so, you got to, the people who are doing that, you've got to recognize how important they are. My grandson likes to go out every Thursday morning when the trash truck comes out. He's got to stand outside and wave to him. And those guys, I ran into one of them at the store. He says, I love your grandson. He makes us feel important because he's always out there to say hi to us. And, so that's just one of those things you've got to do. What can you do to make other people feel good about what a lot of other people consider mundane, trivial, or beneath their character, as Elaine would probably say it is, or Eileen, as Jim calls her. And what can we do to make people feel good about that? So that's an important question I think we have to always consider. And then one of the things that they're talking about, so the whole thing here is we're beginning the rebuilding process of a community in the future. And that kind of goes back to that saying that Bill said earlier in the book, where he says, in order to build the future, we have to first look at the past. What have we done right? What have we done wrong? And so one of the things that Jim gets concerned about is, they don't want to expand their zone of influence. They don't want to get too big, because the larger you make an area that you're responsible for, that responsibility also includes defending. So as you expand your parameter, you have to have more guards. You have to have more trained people. You have to worry about areas where there's likelihood to be attacked, and then develop a rapid deployment force. And all these other things come with that expansion. So Jim is very satisfied with the area that Stonemont has, basically the 3 communities within the Stonemont enclave, and doesn't want to expand any further. And he says, that's just going to be cause us more and more administrative and physical responsibilities that we don't want to take on. So that also means that as Free Love and the other sheriffs come in and are talking to him, that Topeka now wants to rebuild the state of Kansas. And these are all politicians. He's beginning to think the same thing. And there's an essential question that comes up right after that. And let me see what's going on in chat. SSR, you are so absolutely correct. My dad always told me the two most important things in life are, number one, the best way to edify another person is to remember their name. And if you can remember somebody's name, then so Apartment Prepper, it is Max. I've got that. That's important. So anyhow, he always said, the number one thing is when somebody shakes your hand and looks you in the face, remember their name so that you can give it to them next time you're with them. The second most important thing is your signature, because your signature will outlive you. So what people see of your signature is what they define you as in the future, and that's going to be your legacy. So make sure that it is in cursive, legible, and beautiful, because that's the way you want to be remembered, is beautiful, rather than just a squiggly line or something like that. And let's talk about that Apartment Prepper, because I think that's something that we have got to take a look at. And that so far, and I'm halfway through book 4 right now. So we have to take a look at what's happening here and what Steve has put into Jim Wyatt, and take a look at the education he's giving the children, and some of the history that's been revised by the winning side. He talks about there's a conversation, I believe it might have been with Brody, but I think it's with Aiden, where they're having this conversation about who are we? How did we get here? What did we fight? Who did we fight? Why did we fight? And they have that kind of a discussion that we used to have in schools when I was younger. We don't have it anymore. And so having those kinds of discussions with our children, that education, the real truthful education, not the revisionist stuff that we have today. And I know Steve is an advocate of this, and of course, being a Texan, I am too. And that is that the southern 13 states, the Confederate States of America, seceded from the United States. So a civil war is when two factions are vying to control one government. The South never tried to control the United States of America. They decided they would secede from and form their own government. So when the North decided they were going to force the South back into that government, that was an invasion, one nation invading another nation. It was not a civil war. It was actually an invasion. So, how do we get this information into the next junior minds so that they look at things through different eyes and can see what's going on? Okay, let me see where we are here. Did I get that one? Yeah, okay. And some jobs certain people are better suited for than others. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have to fit all those pieces into the puzzle. I had a guy who worked for me when I was the HR director for what was called Home and Small Business Sales at Dell. And this guy was Richard. He was my admin, and every time, and Michael Dell would walk right by my desk, right by my cube when he came in the office. He parked out back. He would walk by my cube, say, "Good morning, Lee." I'd say, "Good morning, Michael." He'd go upstairs to his office. And so Richard could never be found. And he was always out goofing off with the salespeople. And so Michael told me to get rid of him. And so I said, okay. And I said, Richard, you're not doing me any service as my admin, and taking care of all the stuff I need as an HR director. And so I need to find a different job for you. He says, well, put me out on make me a trainer. Let me train people how to sell. I said, no, if you don't have the experience, if you haven't gotten 3 or 4 trophies for Salesman of the Quarter, they aren't going to listen to you. You don't know what they're doing. He says, well, what are you going to do? So I said, I know what I'm going to do. So I talked to Dell Factory Outlet, and now it's called, I forget what they call it now, but anyhow, it's where all of our returned computers get refurbished and they sell them at a discounted price. And I said, I went down and talked to the manager there. I said, hey, I got a guy I want you to interview and see if you can fill that vacant position you have. And he took him. For the next 3 quarters, he was salesman of the quarter because we found the job that he was better suited for. Working for me as an HR admin, he was a failure. As a stand-up, smile, greet, and explain the computers to the customer, he was a super achiever. So, sometimes the job is finding the right fit for somebody. Where's the right place for them, and where can they be successful? And so we're talking about the area, the expansion of the area for Stonemont. So my son-in-law goes to preschool, and so he was talking about they had something that went on at school, and they were watching a movie or a cartoon or something, and he came back. He said, "Oh, they had guns. Don't touch guns. You don't do anything about guns." And the reason he was telling us that was because he likes to go in to one of the rooms in our house, and I have a glass front case, and he said, "Oh, those are bad. You shouldn't touch those." And I'm not sure I like that. I like him, don't touch, but I don't like, those are bad. But yeah, we need good teachers. That's absolutely essential. And we we also need people who are willing to teach it objectively and not subjectively. And I think there's too much subjectivism and liberalism that's going on in our educational system right now. That's the first thing I would like to redesign if I were elected president. And I think part of that is paying attention to people, giving them the respect and seeing what they're good at, and being willing to say, just like Maurice, right? Remember at the beginning, we talked about him, the introduction. At first, you have this prejudicial look at, here's a typical hood that's going to develop into a bad character later on in the book. And then later on in the book, you find out he's a hero. Now, that's the same thing we have to do with people who are in our charge. Find out how can we turn the bad hood guy into a hero. And I think that's going to be critical in the future. And then they decided that they wanted to take their boundaries basically and turn some of the crossing points into trading posts or markets. I'm going to put words in Steve's mouth that he may or may not agree with, but I get the feeling he is of the same definition of markets and trading posts as I am, and that anything, quote, barter is going to be serendipitous. It's going to be very coincidental, or very lucky that number one, you have what the other person wants. Number two, the other person has what you want. And number three, the two of you are willing to do a 1-for-1 trade, and you're both going to walk away from that even happy. So we have to take a look. 95% of the population is not preparing for anything. So why would I spend money on something to trade away right now instead of getting what I need, in hopes that somebody who is unprepared might just have that and want what I have in exchange for it in the future? So I think the idea of these trading posts and markets, that's going to be very important as we see the future. And look back at history once again. If you take a look at the trading companies, the fur trading companies, the forts and everything, most towns grew up in the vicinity of the forts, of our military forts and outposts, and trading establishments out in the far west. And so I think that's kind of the same thing that's happening here. We're establishing something so we can communicate, provide, trade, and enhance the overall community. Oh, come on, cursor. I think the batteries are running out on my cursor. Okay, so I think that he's probably saying that my interpretation of barter and his are in line with each other. I also like I think it's Alex. Yeah, it is Alex. Alex Cool and his scouts. He kind of breaks an order. Don't have contact with anybody you come across, but he does it, and he goes out and he meets Tom, And so Tom is driving the red, I think it's a 64, not a Ranchero. What was it? El Camino. And so anyhow, they're having this exchange. And of course, Alex has now intruded into Tom's area of responsibility, AOR. And so there's this exchange between the two of them. I want you to pay real close attention to this exchange because, you're in somebody else's territory. You have to be humble. You have to be respectful. But notice Alex is very firm, okay? And he doesn't give up too much information so that he becomes subservient to Tom. He wants to maintain that equal footing. And so he says, well, how many guys do you have out there? He says, enough and maybe not enough. It depends on the situation. Let's hope that I don't have to find out which one is correct. And so that kind of gives you that firm impression that, hey, we don't want to have any hostilities between the two of us. If it comes to that, we can handle it. We don't want it. We would much rather be a friend than a foe. So I want you to remember that as one of those rules you need to put in your book, in your own personal book of what you're going to do in the future. Be firm, but be respectful and be humble. And don't give away too much information because that can kind of ruin things for you if it were. So now we're kind of getting close to the end of the book. So, one of the questions that gets asked, and this is as Jim has gone to Topeka and they find out that the politicians want to rebuild Kansas and everything else. And Jim says that he would like to be an autonomous city. And remember, if we go back to biblical times, if we go back to Babylon, that was a city-state. We have all these big city-states, the Medes and everybody else, the Spartans, the Athenians, the Romans, until they began expanding. These were all city-states. They were autonomous areas. And that's kind of what Jim wants to form and not be part of this bigger conglomeration of Kansas. And so, because if you take a look at it, the intents of our forefathers, and we started this off with this discussion about the 17th Amendment and about how senators were supposed to be appointed by the state legislatures, but the 17th Amendment makes them elected by the people. So now it just is an upper house, glorious upper house, much like the House of Representatives. They're going to do what they need to do to get reelected instead of doing what's right for the state. And because of that, we kind of negated the 10th Amendment, which gave us our states' rights and made us a federal republic. And so that, I think that's what Jim is alluding to, and Steve via Jim is alluding to here, is that, if you had the opportunity to build the government back, and they have a lot of discussion here, a lot of philosophical discussion around what do we want to build. And George Washington was almost made our first king. And so there was a lot of stuff going on. Montesquieu is the one who wrote about the separation of the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. And at that time, executive, of course, in Europe was considered a king, and in England, when they became a constitutional republic, that constitutional monarchy, the king or the queen became that executive branch. And so Montesquieu was the one, and John Adams was the one who read Montesquieu and then designed the U.S. based off of the designs of Montesquieu. There were several of the original founders who were opposed to that at first. They didn't want to have that kind of a separation, but that's what we ended up with. And so if you want to rebuild the government, what would you do differently? Let's take a look here in chat. And what are some of the things you would do differently if we could rebuild the government today? Thank you, Steve. So what are some of the things that you would do today if you could rebuild the government? What are some of the things that you would fix if we were to go forward? One thing that I would do immediately, I want term limits. That's number one. I don't think our founding fathers ever intended for us to have a professional politician. That leads automatically to corruption. And so I believe very firmly in term limits, and nobody can serve more than X number of years, because once you do, you start going gray and get into the cesspool. And you just don't want to do that. I also would say that we have to have a balanced budget, and that you can never pass a budget where the country is going to go into you don't want a government that could go into debt, because we're seeing that our debt's going to kill us. If there's any one thing that's going to destroy our nation right now, well, there's a lot of things. I think the number one thing that everybody is going to be voting on right now, I think the number one issue nationwide, and I think the latest poll said 41% of the people say this is their number one issue, and the next closest is down in the 20s, and that's going to be abortion. But over 41% of the population says that the economics right now, the uncapped inflation, the debt, the giving money away that just increases the debt, and our country's bankrupt. And so, that's another thing that I would probably want to do. So Prepping by Faith says, yes, she agrees. Term limits is a must. And then I think this is my last question for you all. He gets into a discussion, and a lot of people don't know this. A lot of you younger people don't know this. He gets into a discussion about, do we want to get into a mutual defense agreement with Geary County and Riley County? I know those two because I spent 3 years at Fort Riley, and some of the other counties around the area. Do we want to get into a mutual defense agreement with them? And Jim is kind of questioning that, and he's saying, and he talks specifically about NATO. Well, there's an implication there, but it doesn't come right out and say it. But back when I was in the Army, there was a mutual defense agreement called NATO, the North American Treaty Organization. And the idea was that the U.S. had troops pre-positioned in West Germany, and if the Warsaw Pact were to come across the border, we would fight them. Then all of a sudden there was this discussion as France developed its nuclear capabilities, and they said, well, if they come across and threaten France, we'll nuke them. And the United States says, no, you won't, because we don't want to endanger the United States with a nuclear retaliation from the Soviet Union if France nukes the Soviet Union. And so Charles de Gaulle was the president of France at that time. He says, no, that's unacceptable to us. He says, if you aren't all in for our defense, like we are all in for our defense, then what good is NATO? And there was a period there for about 30 years where France withdrew from NATO and was not a member of NATO because of that one very issue. And that's the issue that Steve alludes to when Jim Wyatt is talking with the other sheriffs and entering into a mutual defense agreement. If his country, or if his area, Stonemont, becomes the equivalent of the U.S., and they have the power, they have the capability, they have the economy and everything else to support the surrounding areas, are they willing to put all that at risk for another area that might not be willing to come defend them if they were attacked? And so how do you assure that? And so I think that's one of the big questions that we have to ask ourselves is, how far did some of these contracts and compacts and mutual defense agreements, how far are we really willing to go for it? And how are we going to enact that if it does happen? And I think it works best when you have two equal powers, and both of them have something to lose regardless, and both of them have something to gain from it. But when one side wins more and the other side loses more at the expense of the other side, and these are supposed to be partners, I don't think it's going to be a mutual outcome, mutually beneficial outcome of what's going to happen in the future. So that's kind of where I am at the end of the book. And let's check here and see where we are in chat. So I think I would want people to have a certain level of knowledge on the Constitution, Bill of Rights, etc. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are too many people who haven't read them and quote them and don't know what they're quoting and don't know what they're saying. Yes, we did. And back in my days, they did, at least. I know that. A minimum IQ to be a politician. That would be fantastic. That's an interesting thing. Wow, I wonder how that would work. That's interesting. We'll have to take a look at that. You and I'll have to get into a conversation about this because, the first thing that comes to my mind is what's his name, Heinlein, uh, Robert Heinlein, and Robert Heinlein wrote the book Starship Troopers back in the mid '60s, late '60s, and in Starship Troopers, everybody was a subject of the state, and you didn't get citizenship and couldn't be allowed to vote until you served one term in the military. So you had to have military service before you could be allowed to vote. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind with what you're talking about, apartment prepper. And I can see advantages to it. I can also see some disadvantages. That's an interesting subject we'll have to talk about. Yeah, and that's the thing. And that's one of the things that George Patton said in World War II about battle plans, is that battle plans are only good until you have contact with the enemy, and they don't necessarily comply with them because they haven't read them. So the worst thing to your battle plan is the enemy reaction to what you're doing. And so that's a very common thing. Yeah, we can think we're going to plan for things. I told, and then today Uncle Al did a quick showing of a diagram, but last night on Van City's live, I said, one of the big things, I thought I was smart. I thought I had everything planned out for Snowmageddon, had a 5 kW generator and everything else. And then I didn't have a way of getting that power inside the house without leaving an open window or an open door or something at 7 degrees below zero. So, I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. I had to be hit in the face with reality in order to say, I didn't plan this out right. And so now I have, taken care of that with an electrician, and we've got it all figured out. So things are going to get better in the future. But I think that's all of us. We think we've got it well planned. We think we got it figured out until we get hit in the face with reality. And then that becomes the next one. Okay. So down below, we do have, where did I do with my book? I just have it here. And yes, they do. So anybody who wants to become a U.S. citizen has to take the test. And one of the things I disagree with on the test is it's also offered in their native language. And I think that, if we're going to have this hegemony that we call the United States, and we're going to have one homogenous people, the definition of a country is common culture, language, and political process. And so we don't have a common culture. We don't have a common language here in the U.S. In Texas, you have to remember that we were a state of Mexico until we got our independence from Mexico. So the vast majority of the citizens, until the Great Migration of gringos came into the state from the Americas, from the United States, the predominant language here was Spanish. And so we came in, and now it's a United States state. So we say that Texas is the language, but our Constitution says that we are a bilingual state. We have English and Spanish as our state language. So we don't have that common language. And I think that's going to be essential for the future as well. Okay, any other comments or questions before we bring this up? I'm already into An Appeal to Heaven. Let me tell you, it's a fantastic book. I'm going to put, when this gets posted, I'm going to put the link for that. Now, remember, there are two options. Okay, number one option is I'm going to put a link down below for Amazon. You can order all the books there if you want to. You'll get them fairly quickly. And I do get a small commission if you use those links to buy the books. The other option is, please subscribe to Integrative, INTEGRATVIVE, Preparedness, PREPAREDNESS. And Steve has in his about description a contact piece of contact information and how you can go about, if you want to, getting an autographed copy of his books. So if you want to have it autographed, then go to Steve's site, Integrative Preparedness. Not a website, but his channel, YouTube channel, and let him know that you want to get one that's autographed. And if you want one, just so you can be part of the discussion of the last Thursday of this month, I think it's the 29th, we are going to be talking about An Appeal to Heaven. So if you need it quick so you can get it read before then just go ahead and use the link that I'll be putting on here tonight and when it gets posted tomorrow morning. So with that, are there any other questions or anything else that you want to get done before we finish up the evening? Fantastic. Okay, so once again, we're going to go to the book of Exodus, in, no, I'm sorry, the book of Numbers, chapter 6. And we're going to go to verses 23 through 26. And it says, "This is how you shall bless the Israelites and say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace." So remember, we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together. Be respectful, kind, courteous, and loving to your fellow human being, because togetherness is the key. Thank you all for being here. See you the 29th, 8 o'clock. We're going to be discussing An Appeal to Heaven, book 4 in the series. And I have a feeling that book 6 is going to be coming out fairly quickly. So I've got all 5. I'm going to get those read before the end of the month, and we'll see where we are then. Okay, thanks you all for being here. Have a great evening, and please stay safe. Bye-bye.